Hello, listeners, and welcome to today's Cult News. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast, and for in-depth, extensive updates on the Danny Masterson retrial directly from the poll reporter at the courthouse during this retrial, you can follow Tony Ortega on Twitter or head to the Underground Bunker for regular updates as court plays out. If you aren't aware of this case, you can find summaries on my channel breaking it down. Now let's get into it. Week 2 of the Danny Masterson retrial for forcible rape got underway after the first week tied up jury selection. It began with the defence requesting for Leah Remini's removal from the courtroom, which Judge Olmedo denied. Opening statements then proceeded, with DA Mueller focusing on the drugging aspect of allegations of forcible rape against Danny Masterson. After lunch, Philip Cohen for the defence gave opening statements, and there was immediately friction in the courtroom when referring to the previous trial, with Judge Charlene Olmedo cementing ground rules. By the end of Monday, Jane Doe 3 had taken to the stand and began her harrowing testimony, led by the prosecution. In November 2001, Jane Doe 3 woke up to find Danny Masterson on top of her. When she realised what his intentions were, she told him no and yanked out some of his hair to get him off of her. She explained this in a grueling testimony, detailing how, in December 2001, after a glass of wine, she fell asleep but woke up bleeding, with Danny Masterson admitting that he had anally raped her. Jane Doe 3 went on to explain how Miranda Stoggings and her husband, Jane Doe 3's ethics handlers, told her she can't call it rape because she was in a relationship with Danny Masterson and you can't be raped by your boyfriend. She was also asked to demonstrate what had happened between the two of them with pebbles and chess pieces. By the end of Tuesday, it had been described how Scientology stepped in to negotiate the separation between Jane Doe 3 and Danny Masterson and forced Jane Doe 3 to sign an agreement. On Wednesday, Jane Doe 3 continued her testimony, which contained horrific details of sexual assault, with information about how Jane Doe 3 learned of other victims of Danny Masterson, and how she went to the LAPD for help, but it seems as though nothing was ever done, suggesting some Scientology influence, which led Jane Doe 3 to go to the FBI instead. By lunchtime, Jane Doe 3 had finished her direct examination with Deputy Attorney Mueller, and Sean Hawley for the defence was called up to cross-examine Jane Doe 3 and immediately began focusing on Jane Doe 3's history with DA Mueller and the FBI, who became aware of her in 2017. Thursday continued much in the same way, with Sean Hawley attempting to show the jury that Jane Doe 3's story is inconsistent, but this seemed to bring out more information from the victim, who went on to explain how Scientology ordered her to make amends with her abuser by getting his car washed. The cross-examination continued and led Jane Doe 3 to reveal how she had received an email in 2007 with damaging information about Masterson's new wife Bijou Phillips, but then went on to say that the email had been doctored. Jane Doe 3 was eventually allowed to leave the stand in a very emotional state when discussing the harassment her family has endured at the hands of Scientology, ending Jane Doe 3's time on the stand before the defence had finished their cross-examination. By Thursday afternoon, trauma expert Barbara Ziv was sworn in, taking the stand to testify as to why some victims of certain abuse may do things that seem counterintuitive, like continue to see their abusers. The day ended with Sean Hawley cross-examining the expert, attempting to discredit her, of course. Friday saw another witness being sworn in to testify, this time the husband of Jane Doe 3, who took to the stand to describe the terrible harassment his family has been subjected to by Scientology, with details of his dog being killed, and him going full throttle at the defence during his time on the stand. By the end of Friday, Jane Doe 1 had taken the stand and began her testimony into a September 2002 experience with Masterson that turned out would be a precursor to a later attack. Leah Remini was back in the courtroom as Jane Doe 1's support, with the day ending on how Scientology had taught Jane Doe 1 to let go of the first assault from Masterson. Over the weekend, leader of Scientology David Miscavige turned 63, and recent photos of him show a drastic change in his appearance, notably looking as though he has aged a lot very quickly or lost a significant amount of weight in a short period of time. Perhaps it has been all of the running and hiding to prevent being served with legal papers that has caused him to lose weight from stress, as grand jury indictments and charges of human trafficking hang over his head, along with his church's reputation. But there will be more on this later on when we have official updates and news. That is the end of today's Cult News. Please join me tomorrow for more. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.